Good morning, everybody. Good day, and welcome to the Nautical Institute's webinar on investigation and audit rethinking. I hope we're going to have some rethinking here. I'm David Petraco from the Nautical Institute's headquarters in London, and I'm being joined here by Dr. Nippon Anand from his home in Aberdeen. Good morning, Nippon.
Good morning, David.
So
nice to be here.
Thanks. So we were just joking that we're holding this at 6 in the morning in UK just to see how many people are interested. Anyways, we are a international organization, and we do try to move the time zones around to cater for everybody. So before we get started, I hope most of you are familiar with the Nautical Institute. We are a international professional body, and our primary role is to help our members with their professional development. And we do this through a range of sharing amongst professionals. We share in things like our magazines, the Navigator, Seaways, which are all membership benefits. We do events, conferences, training, and webinars. So hopefully we'll be able to share some nice information with you today and get some of your comments. Why do we do it? Well, we believe that professionals make better decisions. So people who have a professional ethos, people who educate themselves, have an attitude of continuous professional development, lifelong learning, that they make better decisions. And that's what we're all here about. And one of the issues is people who do investigations and audits or are being audited, are they able to make better decisions? And that's one of the things that we'll talk to Nippon about in a moment. A few housekeeping notes. This is an interactive event, and your mics and cameras don't work, but you can type in questions. So you have a little control panel, and you have a little white arrow and an orange field here that expands or contracts the control panel. If you expand it, you have a number of options. One of the options is down here. You can type a question and submit it, and it turns up in front of me. So thank you, David, Nikos, and Keys, who have done that already. We have a handout that you can download, and that's a very good article by Nippon called Boxing and Dancing. So feel free to download that. If for any reason your webinar software disappears, you'll have a little icon like this in the background at the bottom of your screen that brings it back to the forefront. After the webinar ends, there's a little survey, so if you could fill that out and just let us know how we did and what we can do better, that's appreciated. A few hours after this webinar, you will get a thank you for attending message email, and in that email there will be a link that you can print out a certificate if you would like to. Probably by tomorrow, a recording of this webinar will be up on our YouTube channel, so just go to YouTube, search for the Nautical Institute, and all of our webinars are there. And you're not alone. There are nearly 500 people registered for this. So if you do write in, please be succinct, and that will help me read your question out. So to introduce Dr. Nippon Anand, started his career in the Merchant Navy for about 10 years, did a bit of university activity, and then having spent years looking at theory, he thought, I need to get back into the field. So he went back into the field as a safety inspector in the North Sea. And if you're going to look at safety issues, the North Sea is a very good place to cut your teeth. And then, having had his theory and his practice, he thought, now what am I going to do? So he started his own consultancy, and is the founder of Novelist Solutions. And he's also a instructor for the NI. He does one of his short courses, which we will mention a little bit later. So welcome, Nippon. Thank you so much for joining us. Rethinking investigations. We know we've had investigations for years. Why do we need to rethink?
Yeah, good question. Why don't we need to rethink invest? I think it's a very pertinent one. It's a nice way to start. Also, the question of why. Why is the most important thing? Why do we need to do certain things? Not just investigations. I would say we actually need to look at audits and investigations both a little bit differently. Um, I will share with you a very personal story about an audit that I was on a few years ago as a safety inspector, where I asked one of the crew members to demonstrate how to use emergency steering system, uh, which he couldn't. He was struggling to give a demo, and at which point I asked him. I said. Unfortunately, I will have to issue non-conformance because you were not able to do that. And his immediate concern was that if you did that, I might lose my job. Um, and then, if you go a little bit deeper to understand his story, he joined the ship at a very short notice. He hardly had any familiarization, and then he has a safety audit, an auditor coming to him and trying to prove himself smarter than him. And therein lies the tension, I think, that the intention is good. We want to do something to improve safety, business, bottom line, but our systems, our mechanisms are not helping us to achieve that goal. Then you look at acts investigations, and the same thing appears. Blaming and shaming people who are trying their very best to do their jobs, and I've seen that in the most horrible accidents in the maritime world, but also average incidents and near misses and whatnot. And inadvertently, we go the route of finding who was responsible for it and how do we deal with that individual. And I think that needs to change. That needs to change to something a little bit more meaningful, which is, genuinely trying to understand the issues, the conditions, the context, and taking companies on a journey towards learning and improvement. So I think if you ask me what is this whole idea of better investigations and audits, I think it's in very simple words, it's moving away from blaming and shaming towards more positive, forward-thinking accountability and and learning. Uh, so that would be my response, David.
Okay, Nippon. Having been a seafarer myself, I can certainly attest to the naming and shaming. Um, if we don't blame people, and I'm a firm believer that people don't go out to make an incident, they don't try to fail. At least if they do, it's a very, very, very small percentage. So if people want to do well and they try, then how do you get around not blaming a person? Is this what is referred to as a just culture? And what is just culture?
The original intention behind the just culture framework was that um, how do you draw the line between um, uh, negligence and innocent mistake? That somebody is being negligent at work and somebody is being innocent. Historically speaking, it goes back to the whole idea of justice in society. Uh, And I think if you use it in the context of legal proceedings, it does make sense. Um, it makes sense because they are qualified people who are looking into this delicate balance. But when you bring it into the safety domain, I think we have an issue here because the whole idea of just and unjust is a very binary thing. It's either trying to find who's innocent or somebody who's guilty. But I think that's not the point. The starting point is to understand the system. Is not to look at the individual. And unfortunately, we get into this very narrow framework of accountability, that whether somebody should be blamed or not. Uh, that so I have very little. Coming full circles with just culture and trying to understand, particularly trying to understand how companies around the world across safety critical industries are implementing this idea, I think it's fundamentally flawed. There is not much to be gained from there, at least in the way it is understood and implemented. I think there is a real strong case to move from just culture towards a more learning-oriented culture, which pays less attention to individual and more to the system that surrounds the individual, the context, the
Thanks.
performance shaping factors.
We've just had a question in from Mohammed saying that within a top-heavy management, can just culture vindicate seafarers? And you've just argued against the just culture. So let's focus on how do we vindicate seafarers? How do we recognize their professionalism when something doesn't go right?
Yeah, I think the best thing to do is to sometimes talk about examples. And I think it's if you look at the recent case of, we can talk about many examples here, but the question you are asking is that how does this whole thing leads to a more fair investigation where things are looked at in balance and proportion. Um, so if you look at, I can only give you examples from the public domain. And one example that comes from the mind is the PIA air crash, Pakistan International Airlines air crash that happened in May this year. And if you look at some of the emerging information that came out, within a few days of the accident, uh, there is already, we're already seeing that the starting point is not to trust the people, is to try and understand why they didn't do certain things, and why were they talking about the coronavirus situation and how it's impacting upon their families, and why were they not focused on their jobs. And that approach fundamentally is about the starting point is that somebody, there's an accident and we don't trust these professionals. And we must find out what they didn't do. And I think so that kind of thing then puts us in a very, very in this shaming and blaming kind of a mindset. But if you approach the whole issue in a slightly different way, which is put all your trust in these people, not what they said, but what they did during the accident, why they did what they did, and why it made sense to them. I think that is the kind of thing that creates trust in the professional and the professional judgment, and that is what drives learning. That is what drives improvement. Because then you are trying to understand things from the point of view of people who are involved in the accident, and not putting your own judgment into it, which happens quite more often than we think it does.
Well, I think you just answered the question. We have a question here from Vinjandra saying, if seafarers believe they will not be blamed or held accountable, is there a chance of complacency setting in and lowering their performance?
Yeah, I think I have often been misquoted that this is about. Please do not see it as a blame-free world. What we are trying to create is a more open, transparent, fair way of investigating, where uh, if there is such a thing like accountability, it is shared across the organization and not just put on the shoulders of the last person in the chain. And this is not a philanthropical kind of stance. It is very much in the favor of business leaders and safety leaders to create a system where you can make people accountable at different levels and not just the last, because it doesn't help that way. It doesn't help anyone, including the business.
Thanks, Nippon. You were talking about public reports. We have a question here from David. He says, do you agree that all maritime panels of inquiry by flag states should be transparent and open with the identities of the persons on the panel named and signing off the report, rather than an anonymous unsigned report by persons who may not have been standing? So public
Yes,
accountability.
yeah, yeah. Um, I honestly feel that this is a great question. I think, and the answer is a simple yes, of course, but a simple yes for a couple of reasons. I think, as I said earlier, uh, acknowledging the report or signing the report is a very clear signal that accountability becomes more visible. It also means that gives public the confidence that or not that the people who are behind the scene or who have done taken the time to investigate the situation have a thorough understanding of the context of the messy details, as we call them in human factors. So I think it brings more credibility and trust into the report. It improves the quality of the report.
Thanks, Nippon. We have a question here from Sarabhat. He says, most companies do not have shoulders broad enough to carry the just culture forward. As we all know in maritime industry, the root cause of most accidents is fatigue and the manning, which no flag states wants to address. So we are going round and round without any solutions. So we hear this a lot, fatigue. And its reflection on manning, its reflection on all the new regulations that are coming out. And in fact, a lot of that fatigue comes from the amount of audits that ships have to go through. So, we are chasing our tail with this, aren't we? We create more audits under the concept of safety, and that causes fatigue and stress, which undermine safety. So how do we break that cycle, or how do we address it?
David, I lost the question. Can you repeat the question once again?
Sure. In essence, it's about fatigue and manning levels. They're causing stress on board, which is in some way reflected by the amount of inspections that are being held on board. So, do we have too many inspections? Do we have not enough manning? Are there not enough hours in the day? Do the inspections take too much time? So the question asked by Sarabet was, flag states seem not to want to address the issue of manning and fatigue. So if this is a case in the maritime industry, and I think you probably will recognize that fatigue and manning is an issue, how do we address that?
Yeah, a good point. How do we address the issue of fatigue and manning? I think I firmly believe that if you want change, you have to be the change. And you have to, there's things you can control and there's things you can sulk about. If you genuinely believe that you want to change something, then we should raise the awareness, and that's the best way of doing it, is to talk about it more openly. Uh, there are no easy solutions, David, and I don't want to give any false assurances here. But I think the lots and lots of things that we have thought in the past would never change are actually changing. These are systemic, deep-rooted problems, and There is no 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or a checklist here that we can go through and address these issues. But the more we talk about it in the forums like this, the more we educate people about it. I'll give you a small example. When I used to work as a safety inspector, uh, the first thing when I would go to on board to do an audit was to ask the question that uh, are you okay for me to come on board? You have all the right to say that you are not fit and you are tired and it's okay and we can come back again. We can work with you. So there are temporary solutions to it, but I think that the real issue here is to talk about these issues more openly, to create that awareness.
I think you're right. And Nippon, you often talk about, are we asking the right questions? Do we have the right tools to get the best out of investigations or audits? Around that question of questions, how can we improve the questions that we ask? And how can we improve our understanding of the answers of those questions, I suppose, is the corollary to that.
Yeah. Again, a really good question. I think I'll go back to asking what exactly is an accident. And a lot of us believe that an accident is unexpected, ugly outcome. Um and we get drawn into a very, set mindset, which is that somebody must have screwed up, and that's the reason why we're here today. But having looked at accidents and audits from another side, which is from a more academic perspective, and researched some of these high-profile cases of accidents. And this is where safety science is going also. That's the future of safety sciences, is that what we often see as an isolated or problem manifests itself in everyday work all the time. So the point I'm making is that there is nothing unusual that happens on the day of the accident, and that connection between either incompetent people and an accident or faulty machinery and accident does not exist. It's not all that clear because that happens all the time. Ships work, ships operate in a nearly perfect environment. It's never perfect. Things are changing every minute. And by trying to understand how people, produce success or manage to get things done on a daily basis, we get a much richer understanding of the problems than by focusing on accidents and as an isolated problem. And that's the kind of fundamental shift that we are seeing in across safety critical industries. And I think I'm very confident that it's coming to the maritime world also faster than we think it is. So that if we approach accidents in that way, I think that that not so much from the consequence, from the ugly outcome, from the finger injury, from the personal injury, from the oil spill, from the grounding of the ship, because that evokes emotions. But if you look at it from the left hand side, which is, how did we get to that situation in the first place, without focusing too much on the accident itself, that produces a much better outcome of in terms of learning and improvement. And there are two parts to it. One is the actual process that the individual, or I don't know what you call the models, the methods, the language that we use. But the other bit is the introspection, as an investigator, as an auditor, take a good hard look at your own self to say, why do we get drawn into thinking in a particular way? And that's where the real essence of value lies. That's where the transformation is.
Thanks, Nippon. And I think you've somewhat addressed Michael's question here. Michael says recommendations are often seen as the end output. Investigations should continue to safety actions, which is the next step. So I think, as you just said, it's what you do with the answers to those questions that's critical.
Yeah, and a good action investigation should not even think about corrective action plans and recommendations. A good action investigation should focus on the problem. There is no need to think too much about the corrective action. They will emerge, they will come out if you did a good job. I'll give you a very small example of that again. And you see that all the time. A ship um, uh, uh, experiences or faces a collision, and there's an investigation, and it's an overtaking situation. Another ship overtakes from behind, and they get into this close quarter, and eventually a collision. Now, the investigator points out that the guys on the bridge lost situation awareness. He should have gone out, uh, keeping a proper lookout. Uh, should have done this, should have done that. All the blessings of the hindsight. And eventually, the conclusion is that they must have lost their situation awareness. So what to do? Buy them a little bit more situation awareness. And how do you do that? Send them for another training and retraining course. But if you keep this folk psychology away of situation awareness and complacency and over reliance and safety culture and whatnot, which we seem to uh, be very good at doing moments after something happens. And if you dig deeper into it, what you realize is that, and this is an empirical example, that somebody had installed a coffee shop on the bridge, on the porthole behind, or the window behind, and soon or slowly, that wasn't the case before, and slowly that window, that porthole started to accumulate with all sort of stuff like biscuit tins and other things, storage material, and at one point almost blocked the window. And what happened on that particular day was that it was raining. The bridge was not a enclosed bridge, so the officer actually has to go out to keep a lookout from behind, which he didn't do on that occasion, and that's why you had an accident. Now we are talking about something that we can do something about. Now we are talking about clearing that coffee shop and clearing that window in the unlikely event of a close quarter situation coming together with rain and adverse weather conditions, which do not normally always allow, are not conducive with good lookout. And you can argue on that again. But the point I'm trying to make is that from situation awareness, we have got to a point where we can do something about it. So, in my view, understanding the problem is the first step, is to create a nuanced understanding of the problem. Corrective actions and preventative actions will follow. One shouldn't worry too much about it. That would be my take.
Yeah. Thanks, Nippon. And in fact, that reminds me of a funny story where Master was woken in the early hours and with the foghorn going off, and he jumped up, looked out his porthole, and there was good visibility. So he dragged himself up onto the bridge to find out why the officer of the watch had started the foghorn. It turns out that the kettle had steamed up all the windows, and
Wow,
anyways,
incredibly powerful.
right. We got a very interesting question here from Anand, and we talked about asking good questions and getting to the root of things, and that's great. He says, I am an incident investigator, but how do I convince the owners to accept the learning culture and not expect the responsible person to be held responsible? So this is somebody who has asked the right questions, who has found the learning bits, but can't convince a company. And this kind of goes back to what David was saying about the flag states. Once you do it, once you know what the lessons learned should be, how do you get people to learn those lessons?
Yeah, I think if you go back about 6 or 7 years ago, when I embarked on this journey, I used to get very frustrated, and I think it's a very genuine question. I used to get very frustrated that why are we blaming people all the time, and why are we not doing this, and why are we not doing that, and become very gutted and very angry. Angry actually is the right word here. But over a period of years, I've started to realize that it's okay to accept certain things. Uh, Once you see the light, your job really is to educate that owner, to educate the people around you, because it takes you a certain level of maturity, a certain level of effort to get to where you are, which is to be able to see the potential benefits of learning, which other people probably haven't seen. So I think one has to be patient with others and not lose self-control. And I'll give you another example. Last year in October, I did a workshop on cost of concordia in Houston, and we had a very senior no, sorry, a middle-level HSE manager from a company uh, in 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 the oil and gas sector. Just 2 weeks ago, I had an email from him to say that ever since I attended your workshop, I embarked on a journey to say every time an accident happens, I would produce a small little report and circulate it around the fleet to say this is the benefit of looking at things inside differently. And he said that initially people ignored it, and then people started to read it, and now the situation has come where the chief operating officer has asked him that every time an accident happens, I want to see your story. I want to understand where the learning and improvement really lies. And by doing that, I have been able to take the company towards a learning journey. So if you genuinely are committed to change this, it's a very wicked problem. There are no easy solutions, because if there were, you wouldn't wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning to hear me, my crap. Uh, so, so here's the challenge that, take it as a personal responsibility to educate people, uh, to show them the light that you have seen, to not lose patience, and to persevere. And once people see the light, particularly people who are in decision-making positions, because don't expect them to know any more than what you do. Just because somebody is being paid better than you are, doesn't mean that they have all the answers. It's your job to build that awareness in your organization, and everything else follows from there.
Thanks, Nippon. And joking about it being 6 in the morning here, there's a comment here from Keys in New Zealand saying it suits him just fine.
Okay, all right.
Being
Actually,
5 o'clock.
I had you in mind, Keith. That's well done.
Right. Well, we got an interesting observation here from Moni, and it comes back to time, being able to take the time to do a good audit, investigation, assessment. And it's interesting. We years ago we were looking at coming up with, from the Nautical Institute, we were looking at identifying some best practice for doing onboard assessments, because it's one thing to send somebody on a 5-day bridge team management course, and then you send them or her home for a month and then back to the ship, and then expect them to take everything they learned in that week and put it into action. How do you know that's happening? And the best thing is to observe how people operate. You were saying about the day-to-day, the difference between an accident and a normal day can be just one link in that chain. One thing is different. So, but how do you make these observations? So we've come up with some best practice on onboard assessments. But one of the things that we've identified is that it takes time. You need to be on the ship for 3 or 4 days to build a rapport, to build that ability to observe people as they naturally work. I mean, anybody can behave themselves for an hour during an inspection. But when you watch somebody day to day, and it's picking up these little things, it's picking up that biscuit tin that's blocking the window, You don't do that in a normal audit. So you need time. And so Moni writes this. What is your opinion about internal audits or safety inspections carried out for several days during a sea passage together with onboard training? Whatever nonconformities are discovered during the inspection are properly addressed by the same inspector with the adequate training. That's what I used to do for the past 5 years, and the feedback was quite good on 150 ships. So, again, it's a sense that an inspector can also be a mentor, and it shouldn't be a policing action. Do we have the right culture for people to learn from inspections and inspectors?
Yeah, and I think, David, you have answered the question really well. I think mentoring, as you very rightly said, is a very powerful tool to do that. And I think and we've had these deep discussions on many occasions that mentoring not just from the auditor or the inspector, but also mentoring from the other side, but actually more from the other side. No inspector, no auditor can humanly, it's not possible for them to know everything. This is why we are coming up with this idea of learning teams, and it's becoming increasingly popular in the maritime world, as is in other safety critical industries. And the idea is to really form an equation between the auditor or the investigator and the person who is being investigated. In fact, that's a very, I don't even like the word investigation, because the whole point, language has a very powerful role, I believe, in everything we do. And the whole idea of investigation is to go and get somebody, the etymology of the word. But essentially, it is about creating that equation between the person who has the authority and the person who has the knowledge to be able to do something meaningful out of it. And I think Moni is right. Forming that relationship and being in a situation for a few days changes the dynamics completely, because from an auditor, investigator, the safety custodian's role, you are now stepping into the role of somebody who's willing to work together with the people and understanding the challenges and making sure that any outcome of the investigation or the audit actually has an impact on improvements, genuine improvements, rather than another taken exercise, rather than another checklist or procedure being put there, which doesn't help anyone.
Thanks, Nippon. And it is about time. And having spoken about spending time on board, we've now spent too much time on the webinar. So I'll try to wrap up a little bit. We've got lots and lots of questions, and I'm sorry if we don't get to everybody's, but this may be a good one to end on, which is from David, different David. How is learning and improvement inculcated throughout a company? So if a company does want to learn, what are some of the key steps or decisions that they have to make before they go on that path?
Wow, what a great question. I need to think about it. I think that's always a good thing. Yeah, practically speaking, a really good question, actually.
I think it's probably to do with leadership, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think the question is directed at learning. I'm just trying to understand what's the best way to address it. I think, David, I think you really, really have to think hard in terms of how we define and practice learning in many organizations. A lot of learning is very indirect, and I'll wait for your response on this before I finish. Please send me a couple of sentences on the chat to see if you agree with me or not, and it's absolutely fine if you're not. Is that a lot of learning is very mediated, is very indirect in many organizations, and by that I mean safety flashes and news bulletins kind of learning, or the kind of learning where you have a small group of people in learning department who would decide what is best for people to learn. And I have a real issue with that, because I think nobody learns that way. And we are talking about, let alone kindergarten students. We are talking about professionals here. Nobody learns like that. People learn best when you create a learning environment. When you create an environment to say it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to spend time with the problem, it's okay to appreciate different viewpoints, even if we don't agree with them. So we really need to, and some of the best learning mechanisms that we have seen are sessions where we have debriefings after an operation, where the master or the captain is willing to listen to other people. You really spend time talking about in a toolbox talk, listening to the AV and or the rating, and listening to his frustrations of getting into an enclosed space, what challenges he or she sees, and making sure they become part of the risk assessment. So to me, that direct learning is much more powerful than this indirect mediated learning that comes from the top, which nobody engages with except that whiteboard or the board in the alleyway, which nobody really reads, but everyone signs on it.
No, I don't disagree with you, Nippon, and you know that I'm happy to disagree with you at various times. And it's definitely a culture. I mean, we are a professional body. That's what we do. We produce material for people to continuously learn from in their careers. That's our whole business. So I'm very sympathetic to this issue, and but it is a culture, and I think it's rewarding or allowing a culture of curiosity. And it was very interesting. I was listening to a radio interview, and there was a leadership coach. Her name was Jennifer, and I'm afraid I can't remember her full name. But they said, "What do you think are the top traits of a leader?" And popped into my mind the great world leaders and what they are. And her top three traits for a leader, which kind of blew me away, was curiosity, empathy, and humility. And it's within a culture like that, where you listen to people, where your curiosity is rewarded, that you bring in this learning culture. So yeah, it is a great question, and I think it is a great question to end on. And speaking of learning, Nippon, you do a workshop for us, and the details of that are on the screen now. Do you want to just have a quick mention of what you cover in that workshop, or why people should attend?
Well, it's not really, marketing is not my strength, but I will
Yeah,
try my very best.
but you don't do it for the market. You do
No,
it for
no, no.
learning.
I will try. Okay, so I have delivered classroom training courses, but the situation has changed now, and we are in a very different environment. But one of the things I'm starting to realize is the power of doing shorter sessions, a couple of hour sessions on a weekly basis, and give people enough time and thinking space is what I call it, thinking space to reflect before they come on the next one. So I've designed this whole course, which is really about what we spoke about just now. How can we move from shaming and blaming towards a culture of learning and improvement? And there are 6 modules to it, and you can read on the NI website about the details of each module. But the format of the workshops is very interactive. A very small group of people. We're talking about 12 to 15 people, where everyone has a chance to go through some practical group exercises to reflect on their experiences, to draw from other people's experiences. In fact, my idea is to keep presentations at the most 15 to 20 minutes, and then start with a group discussion, because that's where I think the learning really lies. The interactive discussions, not the top-down news bulletin and safety flashes from me. So it's to create that environment. It's very enjoyable, and you don't realize until you get to the sixth session that you have really gained. I have also gained a lot of knowledge that we didn't know about as we went through it. And so we start with some acts investigations. We look at the problems with the investigations. Then we move into very quickly into how can we put investigations into a learning framework. And then in third workshop, we look at the problems we face as investigators and auditors, and there are good reasons why we do certain things, and it's really to understand our innate limitations and biases and how to turn them into our strength. So that's the basic course, the basic module, and then in the advanced course, we then move towards a more solution-oriented way, which is now that we understand the problem well, how can we ask better questions? How can we come up with better strategies, better concepts to ask better questions? Eventually, then leading into reflections and the last session. Yeah. The fourth and fifth session is really about discovery, or we call it the discovery zone, where you discover more about your own self, which to my mind is the most powerful thing if you can do, is to talk about an accident has three elements, and so does an audit: the consequence, the context, and the retrospection. And we spend a lot of time with consequence, with the ugly outcome. And the idea really is in the last, the fourth and the fifth session, to understand the context as well as the retrospection, which is to take a hard look at your own self, why you get drawn into a certain way of thinking, and how can you ask better questions. And finally, then summing up with the very reflective kind of conclusion and at the end of it, I also, what I find, one of the things I find missing in many web courses is that there is, when you learn something, you gain something out of it, and you put it in practice, but you haven't had the chance to look into revisiting or having another, lively discussion at the end after you have been on the journey. So I do offer a lot of coaching and mentoring to people who want to go to the next level after a couple of months of this intensive journey. So that's the way I work.
Thanks very much, Nippon. And I must say, Captain Carl just fired in a last shot. Absolutely agreeing with you. He says the best learning is from your own experience and from others. And you touch on one of my favorite words, which is reflection. And we're at the end of the webinar, and we probably need another webinar just on reflection. It's a great tool. So on that, I would like to thank you, Nippon, for joining us here today and for imparting some great wisdom. Yeah.
Likewise, it's a real pleasure to speak to you and to engage with everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining from different parts of the world, especially those who had to wake up at 6 in the morning. I feel for you. Yes.
Okay, and on that note, I thank everybody as well. Thank you for joining. Like I said, this recording of this will be on our YouTube channel probably by tomorrow. And don't forget that the Nautical Institute is a membership organization, so please join us. Join us as a member of the Nautical Institute, but also join us in helping to continually learn from each other. So thank you very much. Nippon, I'll invite you to log off and I will close the session.
Sure. Thank you, David. Thanks.